먼저 동아 방야다 동아래 타 디기 땡이 디기 주야래야 하는 저 삼로 상면 체체 삼로디 멤버디에 바 삼로 상보디에 뭐 공배 검정 공배도 당제 하는 저기 디기 주고 디기 타도게 디기 주야다 동아 때나 사바나 저 방야도 두스체는 방고고레스 대자다 먼저 삼로 당하데 가는 당고고레스에 가서 먼저 모두시네 아니 저게 코야게 가서 동아에 유조 어디 가서 디바세다 뇽모발에 되는 용고래 된 뇽모바데 저 저게 다세 마리바세 로투와 마리바 델레티는 용고고래 시자다 디 매방고고레스 디방발라 당아도 동방이 세베 또베로 디콤발에 되는 방고고레스 시자 되는 자다디 먼저 삼로 되는 공제 방고고 샤고로 시자 되는 자가도 가서 되는게 동방이 고 마슈 되니 곰나다 되는게 두고 뒤주바래.
Good morning. All of us wanting to abide in happiness, free of suffering and problems, we need to embark on this journey of transforming our mind, radically transforming our way of thinking, because this is the method by which one will come to gain lasting, stable happiness. So how to do so? And firstly, one needs to recognize with clarity that our suffering all comes from karma that we've accumulated under the influence of the afflictions. And amongst the afflictions, the very root cause of the stream of suffering is our ignorance of self-grasping. Recognizing that, then we need to strive to develop the antidote, the opposing consciousness, so that we can eradicate the root cause of our suffering. And the antidote to cultivate is the wisdom realizing emptiness. And over the last couple of days, we've spoken about the preliminaries to that meditation and the meditation itself on how to cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness.
가상도学되다 된 것이 냠는체다 돈나 전수 심유권 냠는체다다 안에지 어디 군도 전수 심냠는체다디 니나네다 돈음 심게 계야려야 동반이 또 고고레스 디고로 가상 수사래 다디는 가지고 군도 전수 심 제디 전수 심게 발라다 전수 심 종아 세도다 심게 제 공발라 안니야야 그치 간신의 기호월에서 디고르제 쉬어야다.
Yesterday we concluded looking at the first part of the main practice, so the second of the 7 points of the Mahayana mind training, which is how to cultivate ultimate bodhicitta, the wisdom realizing emptiness. Now we come to the second part of the main practice, which is how to develop conventional bodhicitta. So we'll start by looking at the way to train one's mind so as to give rise, so as to generate conventional bodhicitta. So the sixth line, train in the two, taking and giving alternatively.
디자다 동린니보 빼마장 세도다 간젤레 저기 니지 고묘도 다셴냠지 다셴냠지 요거네 아니가 고미야 도신 동린치는 공고에 세지 순고를 다들들 지라바로 지다라바로 쉬베나.
In brief, this refers to the method of equalizing and exchanging self with others so as to give rise to compassion and bodhicitta.
개와 탐지기 주는 게 자와들이 세대 인자다 전주심 규례 개발라 당보 니지 첨부 끼고 그래 단니 첨부 끼고 반자다 단니 첨부 끼서 개발라다 삼로 가니스탄에 끼고 그래 세다 니지 첨부 세대 가르스는 샘전 탐지 그 동아 타달에 전화 샘 뇽모 바샤다 제발에 저희 자되게 삼로데 samlo choma mayimba chila ane niji chenpo la kore denegi niji chenpo di choma mayimba keba la nye la ngana zuki denegi samlo di pa jangdor che gom ku kore di gomba la tangpo kane kiki yo ba di nam niji chenpo kierang di ta kie tablam di kane ski kore sen du su samtane kie ku kore ese che du su yung kore.
So on our first day together, I spoke about great compassion being the cause for bodhicitta, and that great compassion itself is imperative at the beginning of one's training, so prior to becoming a bodhisattva. It's imperative at the middle of one's training, whilst one is a bodhisattva, and at the end of one's training, when one has completed one's training and is a Buddha. So great compassion is of the utmost importance. So how then to generate it? So this is where we're going to start. So great compassion is the wish for all sentient beings to abandon suffering and the causes of suffering. In other words, their afflictions together with their seeds. So great compassion holds all sentient beings close and wants them to gain freedom from their afflictions and the seeds of their afflictions. That's the meaning of compassion. And this needs to be cultivated to the point where it's uncontrived or spontaneous. It doesn't need to be generated. It is just naturally part of one. So then, we start with looking at how to develop great compassion.
Yeah. Donglin jine gom gore sayadi, da donglin nipo pema che sayadi, da nyema nimi nije gom che nyamlen che nyamlen gyule ye deba che ina ne, da go nyamnyo yeba chasan ha go ye deba ina, da di gom de kabla donglin jine gom gore sayadi, da di dum de wur cha gore. Da ngana zola le tangbo en zang zu da nije gyune nije chenpo nga zu gyule ye me bare, ye me da da ye tang ne kan ski yo ba di ha mo de da di 디니엘에 내가 저 스타다 안줄에 가르고고를 sen다 저 인제세야지 계산 간에 스키고 오래 간에 삼탕고 오래 안데 내게 삼단디네 데네 스키고 오래 데네 계산에 도선 동랑 없는 데네 제세시 쉬베나 당 안줄에 판도 체지 디여요 그래.
This text is very concise, and its ideal target audience is those who are already well learned and trained. So for them, they would come to this point and immediately engage in the practice of taking and giving. But that assumes they have already cultivated great compassion, and they are using then on the basis of taking and giving, they're using on the basis of great compassion the training of taking and giving to generate bodhicitta. So for us, who have not yet developed a great compassion, it is of far more benefit here at this point to learn how to generate great compassion so that we can apply that aspect of the training, cultivating great compassion. So this is where we're going to start, with how to cultivate great compassion.
또 소소라라 동안에 전화 선배게 삼로치마도 semjan 탐제 삼투고 말에 안에 소소라랑 강안에 전화 선배 삼로치 예바기디네 또 소소 강안에 달고도 디기데 땡고 선배 삼로치 요래 나가주길라 안에 딜레도 스타지나 소소고 부부데다 소소 파마다 부야 년디길다 건조 동안에 마전에 약보래 선배 삼로치 동아들에서 배삼로 요래 대한 아니 지금 무뒤네 용가고래 되었어 나 말은 아다이 건속강아 쳐나가면 섬사 제시기로와 지산 삼로 템부디 용거 말에 지난 매반자다 나눠서 소소라랑 디기데 대나 강안에 세나선 배삼로디 균템부라 줘요 말에 맞아 소소랑 강안에 채나선 배삼로 요 말 동아지 중나선 배삼로 용고 말와 제사다 소소라 삼다 이요 말에 다 딜에 되어서 들어갔으면 소소니나 분야다 소소 부디게래 건조 동아다 마테바 디기데 템바 동아다 자나 선배 삼로 용고래 이네 대안에 가브레 용고래 가브레리아 안 지용 말에 가브레리아 안에 소소게 되어서 지가 셈마기와다 마리베 샤바나 어다 제소 강아 최고도 강아 제오 선배 삼로 요시기로와 제사디 안조 삼나라 데네시마도 장도를 데네시 요마 데네시마도 요마래.
The starting point is to recognize, be honest with ourselves about the level of compassion that we have. in truth, we have a sense of compassion for all beings. We want all beings to be free of suffering. But that level of compassion is not equal. It is very dependent on who those beings are to us, how they relate to us. Those that we are quite disconnected for, the feeling of compassion we have for them is quite weak. Those that we dislike, our feeling of compassion, especially when this disliking mind arises, is so weak you could say it's not manifest. Those within our circle, those in our group, those that we identify with, there we have more of a wish of compassion, more of a wish that may they be free of suffering and its causes. But our wish for freedom from suffering and its causes is strongest for ourselves. So this is where we are, and that's fine, it's where we are, but this needs to be recognized, because then we know where our actual starting point is, and that is where we then need to start training. So we need to recognize that we relate to others differently from ourselves.
Bendigo samlo semja dungala dana sambe samlo komyagi magombadi komna mashin bagi magombare magombaza ti semji dungala dana sambe samlo di nichire ngazukule makiware da jumzero tirwa.
Why do we not have this mind of great compassion towards all beings equally? It's just because we haven't cultivated it. This is why we don't have it. We haven't cultivated it. We haven't generated it. And why have we not done so? Because we haven't studied and trained. We do not know how to do so, and we have not done so. So whilst lacking knowledge and training, we cannot be expected to have this quality. That is all. And just to say, this word for study and is also the word for training. It has both meanings. Learning knowledge and integrating that, training your mind in what you are learning. So because that hasn't been done, how can we expect ourselves to have this attitude? Conversely, or from this we recognize by doing so, we will have such an attitude.
Semjendege shen semjendege ranglia din chimbodan gedin chimbo imba shi tengu gore se dia ko ha ko gore chesan din chimbodan gedin chimbo imba den de semjende shanda dige chasan ranglia din chimbo gedin chimbo za chimbo jimba jiyo du andelia an donye zao ji de chesadi sunga jiwa chala ji ne chala so pe rangla be jue chimbodan za chimbo shu shi na delia pe da ho ja di pa gyun ma sho ya 강아마체 균마셔야 송교 휴지기로와 지게 철라마를 송교 휴지기로 온디나시 샘전 탐제 현지게 라를 진천보다 그린 첨보 짜첨보 임바지 라야 계심보지 마하고나 안데 델야 대기다 되나 셈베 삼로시다다 디야고 구구도디 동하다 자고 셈베 삼로리도 그래서 제가 디엔사 땅은 녀라 가고 그랬으네 Semjan Tamja Rali, Jin Chimbodan, Gidin Chimboimba, Za Chimboimba, the Lorpa, Pa, Gumden, Samdan, Jeva Cheduchin, Yane Yadu Dushon, Gomche, Jandor Chevores, did that Semjan Tamja Rali, Jin Chimbo, Gidin Chimboimba, how I did get Chimbores or Dambo. Gidin Chimbo. Dodo read the Laptara mother, Jin Chimbo, the Gidin Chimbo said, Jipa in you, Laptaka.
The first step of our training, well, to come to recognize the first step. If you think of your possessions in your home, there are some that you really hold as dear to you. They have very little resale value. Others will look at them and see, why are you insisting that everywhere you move to, you have this particular possession with you? And it's because for you, it has sentimental value. You value it greatly. And if you were in an emergency and you had to flee your home, you'd make sure you take this with you. So in this way, we see in our regular life, there are some possessions that we value greatly beyond what other people would ascribe to that possession. So this shows this mind of differentiation. Likewise, in terms of people, we differentiate in a similar way. So what we need to challenge this differentiation between people is to come to recall the kindness they have shown us. Because it's through seeing the good that others bring to us, bring into our life, seeing the actual relationship that we have with others, we will value them. We will hold them as dear. So just like in our home, many things, possessions we take for granted, and if we broke them or lost them, it wouldn't really matter to us. But some we hold as really dear, as sentimental. So likewise, this is the kind of attitude to cultivate towards all beings, to recognize their value and how how we benefit from their relationship with them. And in this way, we come to recognize their kindness, or you can translate this as the benefits they bring into our lives. And in this way, we will start to change the way we naturally relate to all others.
당보네 단투야 갈래 하보래 대자 당보 장두이 갑에 가르 장고선 당보 수수 파만네 파말이야 진치 뭐이마 삼다 장고고래스 제자다도 삼다데 랑게마 파마디 nga an chungshin pa chik duchine ane sokyon chedi pame chebare 제자당은 예 수수기 야 레가로지 마전 봐도 pame sokyon chebare 제자다 pamegi sokyon che 대안은 지랑게 마디 마기 ane 지 로건알 바 냐체네 아니 직배 이 로건알 유디갈 마기다 이 부글야 지게 녀진 뇌그레 셈비게 칼라디게 셈야당 파소 조디갑을 빼 삽서 휴신 부글 송급제도 진 지게 게딘 침보시우 제제 안도제 제 메인 안에 계사외네 안에 아미게 지게 오마제야다 칼라제야다 빼 송교쇼스 암 파모 그런 주게 소디 파베지 깔레 가지나 깔레디 뢰다제 엄부게 된다 게 된다로도 제발에 제사다 파마디 빼 맞지 닌침보다 끄진 침보 휴시래도 와 선비게 누신의 삼당고 그래서노.
So develop an attitude of closeness towards all, an attitude where each individual being is held as equally dear. This is very difficult to do. So one needs to train in a specific way so as to break through the barriers of how we misconceive our relationship with others. So in this training of recalling the kindness of others, we start with those whose kindness in this life is the most apparent. So we would start usually in most instances it would be with one's parents, and again within that it would usually be with one's mother. And there one recalls, through recalling the kindness one's mother has shown, we start with the extensive period where we have no recollection. So we imagine how she would have related to us before we had developed the mental capacity to have recollection. From the moment that she was aware of our presence within her body, she immediately changed her behavior. She made sure she moved with care. She made sure that what she ate and drank would not harm us. So from the moment that she became aware of our existence, she related to us with kindness. And through this period of her pregnancy, we didn't bring directly too much joy to her. We brought quite some discomfort. And then at the time of birth, real danger, especially in years gone by, decades gone by, centuries gone by, brought real danger and immense pain. And then, but beyond that, for that first period of our life, when we were completely helpless, that if we were left on our own, we could not have survived. We were completely reliant on the kindness of our parents, in particular usually our mother, for our food, for our protection from the elements, and in this way, she gave to us. What we gave to her in return, directly, very little from our side. We would laugh and we would smile, and this would bring her joy. Beyond that, she was cleaning our bodily fluids, she was feeding us, she was keeping us warm. Giving so much, and directly from our side, giving very little. But in this way, we see how she placed our needs before her own. And even though she would have been, throughout this period, experiencing tremendous hardships, and sometimes some difficulty with it, still she did what was needed for us to stay alive and to grow.
도시대 셰디가블량 가시 어디 밤에 냐리아 두시부터 강아지 사대 개진체면 말이지 삼당고 지금 선배 삼로대 용도 하실래.
I hope for many of you can relate to this easily, and warmth can arise within you. For some, though, what you recall of your parents is not pleasant at all, and one has very negative memories of one's childhood.
안디네 용고를 이내다도 아주기 계획 자와 다디 잠니지 고미알이야 네 고미오도 갑라 다디네기 파미용에 수술이야 안지 직강아제에 대해 용고를 때 이내당 안주기 파미기 연등에 차지는 균이 전이가 유되다 연등에 차다 랑을 팬비 차다 뇌뇌뇌비 차 니가 이해돼 버려. 지사다 디네 여봐서 당한주 걸 삼동은 팬비 차데 랑라 판도 줘야지 디차지 삼당 고래. 디 삼당에나 잠 닌지기 두고래. 지사다 파위스 뇌비기 삼는 소소 약강아제 뇌비기 저 삼당에나 데라 콘롤한 그래. 콘롤라 아니 랑 콘롤라 아니 파 안렌로에 차와치에게 삼는 얘기돼. 디 디바사야 차고 저자디 게티게 라운도 니 차고 말 디바사야 랑강아 샹강아 제 삼리고래 지단 디 초데 삼마타마제 다 갈당 거서네 라에 진체보다 깨진제죠 니 초데 삼다제 니네 삼다베네 라야 잠바다 제베 삼을 기고래 랑이 잠제게 삼로디 슉체로고래 지단 랑기 라라 개와사고래 개와사바자 개와치마 기디나 소소 디기주야다 타바다 탐지 산지 고모토별라 타 녀로야 최고래 제가 디네 상은지 다데 태바침을 로존 냠낸 집에 갑라 다 디니기 랑기 연딩이 차지 랑의 판도벽에 깨딩이 연딩이 차지 삼다제 두신의 공고거래 삼당고거래.
Whilst this is the case in some instances, for our purpose here, we need to be skillful. Why are we reflecting on the kindness of others? It's so that we can become bodhisattvas for the sake of others. So in this part of our training, if we focus on the faults of our parents, what will happen is our mind will become negative, and we will feel more distant from them, or the distance we already feel with them will grow stronger. The negativity we feel towards them will grow stronger. So the reality that everyone can acknowledge is that ordinary beings have wonderful qualities, and that same being also has bad qualities. And there's a varying balance between some have stronger good qualities, some have weaker good qualities. So it's not about dismissing or denying the harm that may have been done to you, but for the purpose here, the purpose of becoming a bodhisattva, we focus on the kindness, the good that our parents have done. Later, when we are skilled practitioners, then when we recall the harm they've done, compassion will arise. We'll recognize they are suffering beings. Hence, they did the best they could, but they afflicted and therefore were suffering and made mistakes. But for now, when the harm that one's parents have done arises, rather put it aside and focus on the kindness they've done. And there's plenty there that one can at least intellectually imagine. One may not recall, but intellectually imagine And this is where we need to place our mind in order to achieve our goal of becoming a bodhisattva.
That is on the Hagoya, Bene, Dusrota, Sosugi, Michilia, Begovuta, and Coronia, Chitzawa Chevena, and the Burush in the Pamarine, the Bud, let's say what Kavushu Chevena, Chiguvena, and Budi, Leg Notre Chevene, and the Gyendo Tungo Mara, and then Ogaya Marison Base, Tushene, got Chunjuras and Nangmet Ashagrua, Gayamar. Didn't the younger say, and then the pool, same social, and the younger Kayamar says, or Dushene, Gyendo Chuvine, and Nangmet Ashene, and Rashiniga, Kangamativa Yungurva, Dio, but the Karasan Budilia, and Zewatan, and Chambat and Kawayo Banza, Kawayo Banza, Dirwada. Da Midelia, Zewasher and Kawure Mevene, Midigi, Sosolia, Yabushi, Yabushi, Pandoya, Gishevena, Killing a share of Martin Agu session, the Nilamsan Lung to Chagara. Just the Karikavation, so some Tanatone Kavashuarda. So some Tanatone, so some Nanta, Yabuch Masan, the Pajadi, Yabushi, Yabuchebene, so Lung to Ada, Namato, the Kigore. So some Nanta, Yabuchi, and the Pajushi, Notre Jevene, and the Yabuch taught the Kayamar, Rashinigala. Mikey by the Mayate Unkor. Just this one, Gidin and the Yoya Bangas, Hakoya to Rwata, Yamyor to what that is.
If you think about it clearly, we can have illustrations that make this difference quite clear in our own lives. Imagine a child misbehaving in some way, maybe making a lot of noise, throwing things around, whatever it may be. And there are two people there, two adults there. One is the loving parent of that child, and the other is someone who doesn't know the child. So the loving parent will, their love for their child will not be impeded, will not be harmed by the child's misbehaving, because what's dominant in their mind is a sense of tenderness towards their child. They will readily accept that this is a little child, maybe a toddler, and is having a tantrum. This is what they do. It's to be expected. It's not the end of the world. The other person, maybe someone who doesn't like children or is just in a bad mood, they're observing the exact same behavior, but have a very different response. And why? Not their child. Maybe they don't like kids. Maybe they're just in a bad mood, but they just wish this child would shut up. Maybe wish it just wasn't there in their presence now at all. So we see two very different responses to the same behavior. And why? These two adults have different ways of thinking. This is all. This is all. It says actually nothing about the two adults. It just means they have a different way of thinking that perhaps is dominant in them, but certainly a different way of thinking that is manifest within them at that moment. That is the only difference. It's nothing fundamental to them as individuals. It's just a different way of thinking.
And Rangi Tinja Bichane, do some Rangi Pamati Beg, Tinchimba, getting Chimbushure, Sampig, Dus, Chisamda, and then Malo do Chin the Jang de, and Shukcher to do, that Rangi Pam, Nichi, Nini Duda, Dus in some died. Denia, and sometimes Shukcher do, Semja, she has Semjel pass some died. Chisa Semjela some died, and there are source in it, Dangan. So the Shen said, the Randa Shen said, Shen Semja said, Be Mazaralia, Din Chimbo, and Gudin Chimbo, Pando Chimbo, Ye Chimbo, Shuchi Res, Garrisene, Benazuke, Sayatunga Roach, Karine, Shenle Dini, Yungur Mother, Shenla Matiamache, Sayatunga, Tuloka, Chasaya, Minduas, and Big, Samdavina, Benazuke, Jachike, Marada, Churada, Omada, Dini Samdavana, Shen Simchin Bejuda, Rada, Lu, Desolate Dini, Yungor, Chesa Desolate Dini, and Saya Tsoi, Tsoi, the Yungor was, Chesa in Bemas, Conzo, Rang, Ranzole, Pandochim, the Getting Chimbush, was, and some tire. Then I took Dulo going again, the Dulo again, the Shen Simjengi, Bada, the Nigitine, and the Chuka, Baba, Soba, Dini, Mambu, Dini, Yungor, Chesa Shenji, the Tin Chimbores. Dine samdado, da dine yubene, da duro sukanda, kala sukanda, session tapkana, tondo tapka, legal simple mangujo, tisu chasa pe, conjugue gale jabji jebal, dine, le saya tisu ragido, pe aborido, chesan, shen semjen di pe, mas a jin chebota, kedin cheboralia, chik pando chimbu jedo, sembe duchine, the shengi, getting you tone, duchine, samtango rechere. Shen Jobata, do Shin something, in this time.
So the meditation, one starts with recollecting the kindness of one's parents, usually start with one's mother and then one's father, and then one expands the circle when this a feeling of tenderness, of closeness, of affection for them arises. One expands that to the next group, with which it's easy to recognize the kindness they've shown. And here one thinks of one's close relatives, one's good friends. And here, again, I recall the kindness that they have shown, the benefits they have brought into your life. Maybe here it's good to say as an aside, so the Tibetan word here is always kindness. But in English, it's better to understand it as both kindness and benefit, because kindness in English implies there's an intention to be of benefit. And that may be lacking, especially in the second group and now in the third group. So think of it as both kindness and benefit. So the second group, back to what Kenla said, the second group then is one's relatives, one's friends, because one can most easily recognize the kindness that they have shown to us, the benefit we have received from them. Then, when a sense of affection for them has arisen too, a sense of warmth has arisen for them too, one then expands to all beings. And this then is more difficult because this is now just a concept, all beings. And the way to relate to this is be aware of our interdependence with them, that we are not isolated beings, but are deeply entwined with beings that in this life we have never met. And here, with a modern way of understanding, we can think of globalization or supply chains, and through this we can recognize how many beings have made effort that led to us being able to eat, led to us being able to wear our clothes, led to us to have whatever possessions we have. None of this we gained by ourselves, but independence on the activities, the kindness of others. In this way, we can use this as a basis to develop a sense of tenderness, of warmth, of closeness towards all beings, including those that we have never met.
Bendigo, 당한 중에 semje 미장 semje 차상이야 두신의 랑기 사야 동야 권야 하는 랑기 대기가 차상 샹래 되고도 진짜 현세의 랑이야 사야 동야다 대술되는 용구도 소소 권야게 대 유제되게 대술 용구도 제가 당한 내내서 주변에 현 멤버 된지 면주제제 안내다지 자고도 현래 면주제를 멤버다 menga 주 유행한다 대내게 면 두편다 되니게 가사 차상도 생각도 되게 두고 제사데 디네자 소수기 지게 최외 튼게 류기 디기 가르치 호베네 차상 현을 뛰는 연구도 와 진짜 현기 뛰어봐서 현기 되니게 내가 제발을 되네 마디 그 중도 진짜 현을 마 뛰어봐가 용하면도 진짜 현세에 대한 디스코헤디 계천부래도 와 진짜 현지랑을 판도래도 와 선비 두신의 삼당고래시래.
In this third step, or the third grouping, all sentient beings, one comes to recognize that the fact that I'm still alive is really dependent on others. If I was not interconnected with others, reliant on others, I probably would have not be here anymore. That I have things to eat, to wear, a home to live in, has all come about in dependence on others. And so too, that whatever my level of health is, this is dependent on others. And we think here of all the machinery and modern technology that's involved not just with food production, but then we can think of medicine as well, and various forms of medical treatment. This has all come about in dependence on the activities of others from which we benefit. So in this way, we come to recognize just how we are the beneficiary of the other beings' beneficial actions. Whether they are intending to be of benefit to us or not, we benefit from them. We are interconnected with them, entwined with them.
Dene za dusin samda. Dene ang zuki shiyun do ne samda ba na rangi shiyun lobjong de le shen le de yung ko shen ji su su lob dene de yung ko re. Andi ma se tang ang zuki tar ke wa chi ma ngon de ko ba to ya ki gyu ke wa sa ya dang. tar ba da tam chi kim ko ba to ya ki lam nyam le rim ba ke wa sa ya de ki ine shen le de yung ko shen lama da dene ki ke we shin ya le de ne pa 대sol에 때내봐 지금 최슈 롭종체 되니 소수게 아니 개화도 개화사야 용거로 와서 제사다 소수게 탈바다 템지 김고 고번 토야다 개화치마 원도 고번 토야 개회사 개화치마 디기 유야게 유개화사야 차상 샹래 때는 용고도 샹래 때는 주보도 제사 현세에 소수게도 현삼다도 소수게 체디기 최외 튕긴 가리나 샹래 때는 용고도 소수 류기 대하들에나 샹래 때는 주 띄우도 샹라틴의 용구도 제자다 소수게 체치마다 개와 농을 탈바 탐제 김고 고보도 개와서에 냠는 기위 냠는 개와기에 대 샹라틴의 용구도 제자 현세의 빼마세 진체모 개된 첨보 슈시레도 선비 누신의 삼당 고래제 누신의 김전되게 삼당.
Furthermore, in this generation of a sense of closeness towards all, one recognizes that the very fact that I can do this meditation and accumulate the causes that will lead to excellent rebirths and lead to my progression and eventual attainment of liberation and enlightenment, this too is dependent on others. So most naturally we'll turn here to the kindness of our spiritual teachers and spiritual tradition. But it's important to recognize that the reason that I'm able to hear and understand these teachings and engage in this meditation, whilst the spiritual teacher is at a central role there, this too is dependent on innumerable beings. The fact that one has an education so that one can understand speech, can read text, and can have the lifestyle where one has time to sit and think about things of great importance. This is dependent on so many beings. There may be central figures, primary figures, but there are so many others who are indispensable. Some we'll know, many we don't know. But from a point of being nearby or at a distance, are all contributing in this web from which we come to gain benefit. So our body, our knowledge, our opportunity to cultivate virtuous karma and spiritually develop, all of this is dependent on the kindness of others. So engaging in this reflection breaks down the barrier between ourselves and others, this feeling of strangers or distance, and breaks that down and recognizes how entwined we are.
그래서 데네자 당한 주 수비념의 체외에 현기 현 체화지게는 여버치가 강한 제버지 여버인자 현을 때네 대술을 때는 소소 수비념의 제하고 그러고 그래서 지산 현 대술을 뛰고래 소수기 진비념의 체외에 현을 진부다서 유주고 그래 제시 진부다지 건설을 땅와더니 진부다와를 때네 소수기 개와사도 그래서 소소 추름 소바이나 추름선에 현을 내베지 매선배 체화지기 매선배 송야라 현지 고고래 제시 현을 때네 소소 추름 송야고 그래 제자다 소수기 땅이 샘잔을 편도제 돈다링이 샘잔 상주고모 토벌 지긴세베 삼다반에 현지고 현을 때네 개월 좀 받아 용고를 제가 현세의 뱀마세다 초간에 삼다반에 현세의 야랑이야 린침보다 그린침보 시우레샤 삼비가 누신의 삼다반에 근데 누신의 삼당고레스 제가 현을 마템바 랑 직부 현 미다 샘잔 가야메바 소수직 샤랑 되면 니미지를 쳐둬야요 말해서 네트고요 말해서 배나 랑기에나 파미기 다보자면은 남산시로로 와 제가 다야 전부 차베네 다 소수게 되니게 즉 수지 매대 소수직보다 자단 지우다 되니게 가야메되게 미메히 신나 식나를 구조를 하서는 아니 쳐둬야요 말와 제가 되니게 소화된 샬라틴의 소우도 대사 누신의 삼단의 현기 김전되네 삼단 some time, then Shandy Bay must get in Chimbo and Jin Chimbo Shuchiresha, Shandy Rala, Pando Chimbo Shuresha, Sasa, Shen, Suzuki Di Yoya, Kewasaya, Tarbata, Temje Jimbo, Water, Chasan, Shanlet in the Yungudu, Assembly, some of Nayodu, and the Shandy Rala, Jin Chimbo, the Getting Chimbo by the Gentle. Some of the same thing, or that Chimbo Shuresha, some of the cool Yegi.
This reflection then also reflects on how, whilst we are, this reflection as mentioned earlier, we're focusing on the good that others bring to us. Certainly we will recall those who are a bit more challenging in our lives. But we recognize that even these people that we are struggling to get on with at the moment, in dependence on them, one has the opportunity to practice patience and to cultivate the great virtue that comes from transforming one's attitude towards others, so as no longer experiencing hardship from them, no longer seeing them as enemies. So to cultivate the virtue of patience is entirely dependent on others. So too, the practice of ethical restraint, that in order to restrain oneself from bringing harm to others, one needs to have others to engage in. So in this way, we see that even those that we find challenging, in dependence on them, we cultivate causes for lasting happiness. And in this way, they show us kindness or bring benefits into our life. And the third illustration that's clear is generosity. So generosity is expressed in many ways, but in particular it comes down to this attitude of giving of oneself to others, being open and receptive to be there for others. This is entirely dependent on others to give our time, to give our energy, to share our possessions with. So we see in this way how we are dependent on others to accumulate virtue. And in reality, if we were entirely alone, we couldn't survive even a day. Where this is most clear is when we were within our mother's bodies, and when we were an infant, and even a young toddler, completely dependent on the care of others. We could not have survived a day. But even now as adults, if we were completely independent of others, we would not survive the day. Because our food comes about in dependence on others. You cannot even grow your own food without the support of insects and so forth. This entire world is a dependent arising. By reflecting well, we come to recognize this deep, entwined relationship with others. And therefore we are not alone, but we support others and they support us. This is the nature of our interdependent relationships.
On the Nigida, Simjan Temje, Shandy Ran like in Chimbot and Zachimbu Matono, that's Simjan Digilia, Simjan de Deva, the Temple, Chisankonzo Digi, who to Tigi, the Temple shows and be some Chambakumia. Then is Simjan Desolia, and did Ganga Chetu in this Chasan Dunga, the Jawo to Sembigita, Dunga the Jawo to Dunga the Jawa shows Sembigita, Nishitiki, the Yungore.
Thinking in this way, it leads to a warmth towards others, a closeness, holding them affectionately, tenderly. And to the extent that arises, naturally we'll want them to be happy. We'll want the very best for them. And this is the arisal of love. May all beings be happy and have the causes for happiness. And following from that is the companion mind of compassion. And may they be free of suffering and the cause of suffering.
On the need that Simjan Deva, Simjan Sama Deva, the temple show, Deva, Dengo do Sembe, Samachita, Simjan Tamjeta, Tunga, Madan, the Taman, Tunga, the Tauku Sembege, the Nigga Samlodi, Jema Mayin by Kiyodu, then the Ninchi, Jamnichi, so the Kulik, yes, order.
One trains and trains until this arises spontaneously, is uncontrived. One doesn't need to sit down and meditate to cultivate love and compassion for others. Then one can be said, when it's uncontrived, to have generated love and compassion.
And then Simjan Dunga, the Jawu, Sitana, Sembeke, Ninchi Kiwa Inza, da Simjan Dunga, Nadiwadi, Dunga, the Narsha, da Consola Kanga, Karidus, and 동하기 되게 강아지가 현sem전 되게 동하기 강아지도 제가 동하 근데 동하기 계셔 동하 강아지 근데 지금 녀모베게 계셔 녀모보 온게 강아지 제사다 sem절에 강아지 해데 강아지에 가르치고 있는 동하디 뭐소게 동하디 뭐소 강아지 되는 녀모디 군주세야 되게 아니 귀네 도신 귀견제제 될때 동하기 강아지도 제사 sem전 대 강아지에 되는 책도 다 디기다 매바데 가르쳐서는 콘솔이야 셈 지게 디기 매바디 다 강한 체에서 디기더라고요 말과 그래서 다 강한 체에 디기디 강한 체도 오셈백이다 그러니까 동화 강한 체 동화 모습 강한 체 동화기 모습 체 동화기 주 녀모바디기 군주가 되게 유인이야 다 셈전라 강한 체에 디기 제샤 셈백이 도스치나 삼당 도스치네 다 디네 인자데 강한디 파 세고도 동화디기 파 세고도 동화의 군주디기 방이 콘솔에 세고도 셈베다 닝도 불마서나 니 강아지게 세제 동아디 니 매바 수긴 셈베 삼로데 닝도티 리고레시 공고레시
With the mind of compassion, this wish, may all sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. Here, this really comes down to wanting beings to abandon the afflictions together with their seeds, so they never suffer again. So this really is what the meaning of compassion in Buddhism is. It's directed at all beings equally to be freed of the afflictions and the causes of the afflictions. The way, though, it would be experienced is think back to what we heard in the preliminary practices. First, to be freed of manifest suffering, and as well as subtle suffering, so true sufferings, as well as the origins of suffering, true origins, namely the afflictions. This is what compassion is focused on. The suffering that beings experience, but in particular, the subtler levels and the origins of their suffering. And having trained well in the preliminaries, this will arise within oneself. One will have that experience of wanting to be freed oneself from this, and now one's applying it to others. Moreover, the mind will be strong because of the prior training also in developing an understanding of emptiness. This will give one a great strength of mind, a determined attitude of not only do I want to be a person who leads all beings to attain a state freed of suffering, but I can do that. It is not beyond my capacity, moreover it's not beyond their capacity to be guided and attain freedom. So this leads to a strength of mind, a confidence, which, as mentioned yesterday, is a defining feature of compassion in Buddhism, that it is not merely empathy, but it is a deeply courageous mind, born from a conviction of knowing that this is entirely possible.
Dine samdang da dine shine gomje de da donlin ni bo pewa pema che sa de da shine di samdang gomje de donlin ni bo pema che sa chesa da de gomje de.
With that arisen in the mind, finally then, the sixth point, one can train in the two, taking and giving alternatively. So this is the point when one now trains in taking and giving, or practices taking and giving.
And then in that Karisana Semjan Tamjada Dunga Nardusha, Dungagi Nardusha, Dungaya Ganga Jesha, Jesati, Nimas and the Tamido Semlia, Bening Dol Masona, Shochiki, Gevanza, Diki of the Dakarkumbos and Takanga di Dungagi Resha, Dungagi, Dungada, Dunga Union Batiki Reshas, Chesa Denenza, Semja Tamjigi, Dunga, Lula, Semju, Dunga Ganga Digeta, and Ganga Union of Basha, that Cheva Chasa, Ni to Lenje, Ni Ma Semma, Ni by Lulpa, Timber Shows and became Webache. And do Shene, that Lemba said this order, Chesa, those Comiade. That don't see that Consolia Karaku, Dene Digi Geta, Gawa, Digi the Kudu, Chesade, Nay Digita, Digi, you Gawada Chepa Chasa, Passimjel Patangje, Passenjalje, Dene Semjanamje, Digi de Semjanamjane, gave Yamleje, and Dinike Tar 산지고바 토소 선비기 데니게 삼다지 매바치지 두스 고미아데 동len 곰세 디시월 지자 두신 삼다지 두시데 소시 데니 가사나징 아주 저기 쳐주 원도 삼다 데니 안지 지차사 삼다데 데니 동바니고 삼다데 데니 삼다위 쉐위 젤야 다데시 닝제 두시 삼다 데네지네 다 셈제니게랴 두시네 셈자 탐지에다 류게 나사 셈유 동아 차사다 아니 요모바 바샤데 제바 차사 수련제 소수규레 팀송 세비 메바체리 아니 콘주규레다 장마장장 차세 류게 나사메바 셈제 강아메바 셈지 동아 요요 유뇨모 바샤데 제바 강아메바 장마장장 차송 셈비 삼다 두시네 동 렘바세 데네 동아시데 소수기 류기 대와 셈기와 류셈 디기디기 파 디기다 디용하여 그 유개와 개와 바샤데 바 차사 파 소수기 셈 강여바데 차사 즉 뢰지 파 컨트롤 따지 파제 파제네 되네 컨트롤 바 류레 팀데 네네 류셈 디기데 템바차 네 셈데 잠바다 지비에 삼바 이제 냠네 초사디기 지표 관여고도 폐제 산조고바 토송와 님비 메바체디 두신에 동래전데 두신 삼다 파 두신 삼당 오래서 다 동래니베 빼마 제세데 디레 파 추레 파당 추레 파다 되네 그 고면에서 오다 류기 나자 셈기 동아 나제 들어와다 류디레면 류기 나자다 셈기 동아디게다 안디 용의 유용모바 바차다 제바 수리 지리다 피주미디 장마장장 그래서 괜을마 선다다 류디 코로 여러와다 장마장이 셈다 류다 강야 괜 가야면 장마장장 차소서 비게 매바제 되네 랑게 개와다 아니 랑게 류디와 셈기와 디기디게다 개외 유개와 자와 바차다 제바 차서 콜 파제네 아니 콜이야 중소 셈비 매바제 되네 셈젠디게 중소 되네 매바지는 콘두게다 개외 냠내지네 소사 딥샤 양모 공을 패드치네 산여고방 토소 셈비게 두시는 매바지는 공부를 해서 다 동래니 빼마지 제사디레다 빼마장 세데누세 셈데다 장세도 소수기 로디도 장도 소소 로디 인도 불마선의 체주고 다가지
Then in the meditation on taking and giving, what taking refers to is one imagines all the suffering that beings are experiencing, in both physical and mental, as well as the causes of suffering. So there would be their afflictions and their seeds. So one imagines taking those from them. So to link it back to what we've looked at earlier, true sufferings and true origins, this is what one is taking from them. Their physical suffering, their mental suffering, and the causes of suffering, their afflictions and the seeds of the afflictions. So imagine taking these on, and then in return, what we give is all our virtue. The virtue that we have accumulated in this meditation thus far, as well as the virtue we're accumulating by wholeheartedly wanting them to be free of suffering so that we're taking it on, all the virtue that we've accumulated in lifetimes up to this point so that we are able to engage in this meditation, all this virtue we imagine giving to them. And we imagine that virtue then abiding within them. Their mind is now free of afflictions. Their mind is dominated by virtuous thoughts and the seeds of virtuous thoughts. And we imagine that ripening within them, that their body is a body free of any pain or difficulty. They're developing qualities of the path within, whether calm abiding, definite emergence, love, compassion, bodhicitta, realizing emptiness and becoming Buddhas. So all of this we imagine with giving. So this then is the meaning of taking and giving. We do so in the sequence of meditations. If we start with preparing our meditation room, so the 6 preparatory practices, we do the two parts of the preliminary meditations: precious human rebirth, impermanence, true sufferings, true origins. And then we cultivate the wisdom and understanding emptiness, and then we cultivate compassion. So these are all the prior meditations we do, and now we're engaging in taking and giving in the way it's just described. Sorry, the last thing I forgot. And by engaging in this taking and giving, the purpose for ourselves is to strengthen our determination to be of benefit to others, to ease their suffering burden. And through this process of imagining others suffering ever less because of our engagement and experiencing ever greater happiness because of our engagement, this strengthens our courage, our strength of mind, that we can have a beneficial impact on others.
Jisanda tonglen nibo pema che se du chen samda pa tenegi du chen da susura da nyamja ru nyamja ngone da marite tenegi samda je da sem zechi ba samda shen ma yan wa che sem shen ma yan wa du chen da susura ra ge du shele ma sona da karma ka se tu tu ne du chen pa tang so chu len ba yin sam pa tang ba yin du chen ji ane ya du chen ane samda wo les de samda ba de kar 소소게 닝도 되시고 지금 당한줄라 가르스네 강아 되게스면 생기 생리 로고 제게 섬려나 생기 강아 되게 소소일 해기 어디 섬르디 갈하고 버차고 와다 배내가는 저게 네마 저게 내암 요도 갑리아 아니 소소게 배지 부다 파마다 가우니 오시오 내암의 포송회나 디람네 로제 아니 저기 제들에 됐 zemgo chikasa nede soso goyugres ne soso goyne soso kanga tigres be samde ta koy nede chu le na pasha nede soso lebe na soso kanga tigres ngazu di de chik yungo mar chesa soso kanga tigres kasa ngazu la rang jezing samlo de shu shimbu shu ya za da on ha ka kanga tigre gayo tigre pesagres sambe de nege sam yo ba insa chesa ngazu ge shengi dunga chu le samda de ngazu le da 강아 체모래 강아 연구를 받아 어jen게 동화 찾아서 나 가라 되게 나 내가 냠다 휴차기로 와서 나 교우 휴차기로 선배 삼로 연구를 와 진짜 내내게 삼도다 나줄이야 내내게 장도를 매도 강아 요래 진짜 내내자다 또 신의 장기 정해 전에 대야 장뒤 qabla 당보 소소를 때네 소소게 강아 되게 수련 답변에 로제마다 다와제마 강아 요버티니 동안요아 되게네 다데는 수련제 다데가 수련제 소소게 동안 연구에서 배 매바체 안 되네게 전에 마음바다 동안 용며 용 먹어야게 세서 셈비 두시나 삼다도 정해 전에 아니야 셈제 탐지기 동안 수련하다 파다야도 두신 장고래서 당보 소소 마 두신 제고래 송도하다 로장뒤 qabla
laten we die sempre zo'n gebed. Sempre kan al tanto je per kan je de dan sempre waarom je per kan je.
Met dambo nga zuge. 소소라 dambo 소소를 병아 되게 랭고레스. 소승 benenga 소소라 산니에 강할 제 나니가 로제마가 다와제마 강할 제 동안 용어에 되게 여러 봐. 대지 동안 되게 수 렌제 다되는 수 렌제 다되는 용고에 네 랭고에 알로제마다 다와제마 뇽모에 차서서 비두친 삼다데 제가 랑게 동안 먹고디게 마음바 용어에 되게 차사 다되는 수 렌제 렘베게 뭐바 제나베 제마나 또 섬로디 곰슈를 맞아 슈체셔 주고레스
sempre che cambiamo lens, sempre là che vuoi dini de ma c'è come sono anche con la samlo tanto de
제가 디다데 ngaranzolina 디 데지가르사스는 잠니지 규르게 사겐되게 냠네 제도 동림 배제고래서도 ngaranzo 동림 제바 있는 또 강한 책이래스 디가르사 ngaranzo 셈 장도로 요 말을 와서 그래 제자다 ngaranzo 가르치고래서네 강한 마체게 된다 가르치고래서는 소소 당보네 아니 소소 강래 소소 동아되게 수련 아니 강아쟁이 래 링규에서 배도시는 매바지도 장에서 로도 되게 슈처셔 주고래 데네 제네 도신 셈자 탐제된 삼단 만절레도 수아이 차고래 제자다 장타데 되네 장고래서 송도
When engaging in this meditation on taking the suffering on from others and giving virtue to them, one abides in meditation with as little distraction as possible. So the actual yogis would be in meditative equipoise, so the mind completely undistracted. And for us, we try and do so for a few minutes. Actual yogins would do so for a lot longer. And we in this way, engage in taking and giving with the entire preceding meditation. All that being said, another point needs to be made here. To bring it back down to reality, to take it away from the level of aspiration and bring it back down to reality, which is where we are now, is as beings with strong self-cherishing, where the fulfillment of our own needs is really still first and foremost. Hence, we need to embark on this process of training. So when the thought of genuinely taking on the suffering of others arises, there will, in all honesty, be a hesitation. And we can see this in lived experience. If you think back to where it would be 6 years ago, when the pandemic was starting in the world, and the causes, the outcome, and so forth was not known. Treatment was what hadn't yet been developed. There was tremendous fear, and people were encouraged and did isolate themselves from others. And they didn't want to be near anyone who was sick because they knew that something bad would happen. We didn't yet know what, but they protected themselves first and foremost. And whilst those days are for now behind us, even with regular illness like influenza, if someone's contagious, we still protect ourselves. This is where we are as ordinary people. Our own happiness and the achievement of our own happiness is still first and foremost. So understanding that, where we are, then it is more skillful to engage in this meditation on taking and giving with one's own situation, where one imagines transforming the suffering that oneself is experiencing, as well as imagine suffering that will still befall you, physical or mental suffering, and imagine transforming it through this meditation and oneself becoming free of suffering and its causes and spiritually developing. So the meditation is done in the same way as presented before, but in relation to oneself, taking and eradicating one's own suffering and the causes of suffering, and giving oneself the causes of happiness and attaining the results of those causes of happiness. So this is where one should start right now, to develop skill in the meditation so that one can then actually be able to do it in relation to others with a genuinely courageous mind.
도시네 다동len 도시 semja 탐지기 동아 규다 제바 수 렌저 소소의 렌 소소리아 팀소아서 메바죠 소소의 계획사와 디기 차산 셴을 제제 콘도 디기도 준수 셈베기된 동len 공고그레세지 송라다 디스공고그레스 나는 저 삼나라 카리오르세네다 제 공고라다 데니 고동len 공바이나 semja 탐지기 동아 규다 제바 수 렌규에서 메바치나 수 링고어베 링고 말스네 링고 말와 동안 나데 다가라 동안 강아 녀디어 거다 나 수수의 개와다 디기다 차상 콘솔 제제 아는 콘솔야지 디기 녀의 뭐바 제베나 콘솔 용고어베스네 용고 말와 디니 지네 판도스케미도 안네 수수의 동안 같이 링에서나 파죠 동안 다가라 하되어래 수수의 디기디 파 제베서나 콘솔은 디기지라요 말에 신디 삼나 가르 판도야 디지 다가스 단다 주에 매바 안에지 디스톨라다야로 두와서 베게 댄시기로와.
So to return then to the way the meditation is intended for the greater practitioners, where one is taking on the suffering of others and giving one's virtue to them, then the question will arise, in reality, what is going on here? Am I really going to experience their suffering? Is it going to actually ripen on my continuum? And thereby I can say, I actually have taken the suffering of others. And by giving my virtue to them, will it really ripen on their continuum? And thereby they attain freedom from happiness? In reality, this isn't going to happen. Then that leads to the second question. Then why am I doing this? Is this not just a waste of time? I'm just playing some game in my mind? What is the point of this then? You go through this whole meditation, just making something up? What is the point of this? So really, in reality, this process cannot be done in a literal sense. Because if it could, we'd all be enlightened long ago. Because the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas would have long since done it for us. So in reality, one cannot take the suffering of others and give happiness to them.
소수게 닝도때 휴지기 오래 소수게 삼로데 갸시로 오래 템부로 오래 제산 현리에 판도 주여데 현이 누가 세야래야 벤닝도 휴지 강한 마체바 닝도 휴 안데 지기 용거래 제산 먼저 가르세는 대시바다 오당아 디진 현 로보지는 안한 강아 티리 나 강아 티 선배데 지 용거로 와 제산 디기 잼제 현 로보지 두고 말 대대디 두스 콤바인 소소리아 닝도 빼마세 현 샘전 탐지게 된다래 가르치나 제 두게 제산 로보지 투야다 되니기 닝도 마선에 휴지 소수게 닝도 휴침부 휴기에도 공오 공배도 주고래 니 공은 공배도 가지고 저비기 저기 소수 닝도도야 장기장기 누가 체주도 산지 공원 더벌이야 다 년이 주고 봐 제사다 배능하는 저기 라마 쳐봐나래 샘제르시야 날매베 매난가바 제스네외자 인제미 교장쇼 초선베 전제 발전 도바 진길로스 전주의 년에 송고로 봐 제사 샘전 지기 된다라 샘전 리기 지기 된다라 안냐와랴 가바 장매 되고 제변행이 되긴스 곧 샘슈 자기메세 되니게 다 제사 되니게 샘전 지기 된라 가바 장매냐와 되고 제변에 디나제 샘전 빠도매 봐요 다 같이 되고 제사 같이 되고 있나 니 되제 강한 지긴 세비기다尊주를 마소나 개외 냠는 제바 탈신바尊주이 탈신고고라 내내지 룹토고라 고고라 제사 되니 인자다 되니게 삼자하디 소수게 삼로라 닝도 지우장로고라 당원이니술라 동아 랭기와 말렌 투고 말데이나 소수게 삼로 닝도 닝도 지우장로고라 제사다 소수게 삼로 닝도 누가 공부해도 줘야지 된다 탑람리데 됐어.
So whilst in reality we are not freeing even a single being from their suffering entirely and placing even a single being in the state of a Buddha, nevertheless though, this is a greatly important training because of the impact it has on our mind. Training in this way, going through this process of meditation, leads to the mind of the meditator becoming vast and expansive, and in particular courageous. This meditation has this particular quality of developing the strength of mind of the practitioner that then has an impact on how the practitioner engages with others. So in this way, it has a real-world application in the sense, through doing the meditation, that meditation itself doesn't lead to all beings becoming Buddhas. But through the impact it has on the practitioner's mind, the practitioner thereafter has a direct impact on others. In that, it impacts how the practitioner directly engages with others. Well trained in taking on the suffering and giving benefit to others will then be expressed in one's interactions with others. And in this way, one directly brings benefit to others. And furthermore, this aspect of courage or strength of mind is imperative for the Bodhisattva, because the commitment that the Bodhisattva makes is to each and every being, without exception. And so here, if we think of the Lama Chopa Puja, in the 104th verse, when in the Lamrim prayer, talking about enthusiastic perseverance. So I'll read the verse. Please bless me to complete the perfection of joyous perseverance by striving with compassion for supreme enlightenment, not getting discouraged even if I must remain for an ocean of eons in the fiery hells of Aviti for every sentient being. So that expression of that attitude expressed there shows a deeply courageous mind, a mind that does not get disturbed by needing to encounter beings who are suffering and having hardship, whoever they are. With joy, in whatever circumstance they're in, with joy, I will be there with them, and my mind will not be disturbed, not be upset, but I will give ever more. So this kind of attitude it comes about through engaging in taking and giving.
Thubten Dikpa Chu Mi Chu Sing, Thubten Dikpa Chu Mi Chu Sing, Sim Dunga Chu Chu Mares. Thubten Dikpa Chu Mi Chu Sing, Joy Dunga Chagi Misela, Niji Topa Shanla Pominte, Chuni Demba Dembe Joa Curus. That's something doing when it can say, Dunga said the tablam, the nation say what is a song or something. Then that's my session. I do the connection. The Nila or Tamba. Chesa Thubten Dikpa Chu Mi Chu said 60 Dondala. That's something Dunga Ganga Digi and the Duro let Java Yabano Chu Java Mava Sugdua, Dina Shinchene, and the Simji Dunga Ganga Digipa, Chu Jine, Mava Sayamares, Dinner to Chimide. Dunga Chagi Misela Sevadata, Jovalia, Gangbalia, Chama Subana, Sulabi, Dunche, and the Ganga Sayore. Chesada. Denigi that is something you do not get not do not you not Japati, Sanji su lenge, Labe su lenge, console meva say your mothers. That Anagarsan console digi Guguare, then you can digi, she indicate Yapoti, your console, Jane, console digi say yours and your mothers. That is Chiva Sasan wins to Yeme, your mothers. And that in you carry yours, can this to Bure Lamna. Ni Chuni Demba Demi Georgius. Ni Consulia, and the Dunga Segi, Tablam, and the Ganga Digi Tablam, somewhat on Yamlenje, the Rimba de Dusu, Jegore said the Chuni Demba Dembani Namshada, Dembashi Namsha Dusing Shea, Consular Lobjon J. Soso Ranang, Lobjon J. But Soso Ranang and Yamlenje, Dunga Segore, Digi to Gore, says, and that is some more.
And to quote a famous verse from Sutra of the Buddha, where the first three lines stand in stark contradiction to the practice of taking and giving, the first three lines, but the fourth line explains the actual purpose in reality of the practice of taking and giving. So the verse goes something like, I cannot wash away the non-virtue of beings with water. I cannot remove their suffering with my hands. I cannot bestow my qualities upon them. So those first three lines clearly show that taking and giving, you could say, doesn't work. Because I cannot wash away their non-virtue with water. I cannot remove their suffering with my hands, and I cannot bestow my good qualities on them. So here, then you ask, what's the point of taking and giving? The fourth line then, the only way I can help is by teaching, and they striving to liberate themselves. So this then is how taking and giving actually works. So retranslate that fourth line in a more expansive way to match the meaning here. The way that I can help is by teaching and guiding beings so that through my influence they train in the Four Noble Truths and the paths of the Bodhisattva and thereby attain enlightenment. So this is how the Buddhas help beings. And this is how, through the engaging in taking and giving, that one develops the qualities within, that one can be a skillful guide and guide beings through one's example, through one's influence, not being disturbed by suffering, of willingly giving of oneself, and thereby lead all beings to enlightenment.
Dine zada sanji ki konsolya ngana semjelya chike tar dunga se digi tuya tablam di nyamsu lenchu dine dunga la se dan digi tuya res tablam da zo di res so dine zan de tablam de dia ane chige sul ding go sene da ngana zuri mil ma do shen dunjo da ne chige semjel chasalya den tuya kala habro 제가 당한테 밀리래 저 밀리 판도 해야 돼. 제가 샘전 눈으로 돼 소리야 칼라다 돼서 내 나서 더 강하세 주마도 샘버 규라 땅야기 아니 디기주에 탈람 냠는 제 좀 땐네 거기서 하고야 하고 돼야 말로. 뒤 하고 돼야 밀에 당한테 밀리래. 제가 가상 슈버나진 당한테 동화세에 탑람디 동화대 가리는 거였는데 되자 콘도 나게를 때는 용고래 대양 다세 마리빠때는 용고래 세상디 동아야 규티소래서 바로 되시 디 나네 매바서라 다세 마리빠세 매바 자와티디 매바서고래 니 매바서 가르서는 동반이 삼다 제바제 두신 꼼적 매바서고래서 탑람디래다 두송 버려와 제사 디셰 엔디니기 노스 코미아데 다 밀레 아주 밀마도 요 말다 제가 미 전에다 안 주게다 살아 용거다 안 주게 살아요 제도 말바다 밀이야 살다 밀마도 요 말다 되니게 다 저 무수 냐면지 심바 땡제 냠수 파셰디 셰데 미다 하다 밀이야셰 냠수 랭게디야 미다 해 때래 냠수 랭고 보인자 고이마도 셴 둔주에 때는 냠수 랭투야 메르와 매바자다 대징아 중원주 갈래 단주류데 계체보래서 좀세 디소차고 되니게 삼당에도 제가 도시에 제가 당위니 수기 다 동화세 디기주야 탐람 디레세도
So through training in the methods presented in this text, we will become Buddhas. So in this way, we can see how the Buddhas, through their training, are benefiting us. We are, in a sense, a result of their expression of taking and giving. So the Buddhas, their focus in terms of benefiting, whilst with their bodhicitta, their focus is on each and every being equally, they primarily focus on those who can cultivate the paths within their continuum. Because this fourth line of that verse, the only way I can help you is by teaching, and you train as striving to train yourself. This is something that those with a precious human rebirth can do. The way Buddhas and Bodhisattvas can help beings in other realms, such as animals, is by showing them kindness, giving them food, not doing harm. And this is what we can do for them too. But for human beings, in particular those with a precious human rebirth, one can cultivate the qualities of the path. Because it's only those with a precious human rebirth who can actually understand that our suffering comes from non-virtuous karma, which was accumulated by the afflictions, which have at their root the ignorance of self-grasping, and can be abandoned through the cultivation of the wisdom-realizing emptiness, which itself needs to be developed in dependence on its preliminary practices, reflecting on precious human rebirth, impermanence, and the Four Noble Truths. So in this way, we see how we are the beneficiaries of the kindness of all others, in particular through the practice of taking and giving of the great beings. And we also recognize the importance of a precious human rebirth, of making the very most of what we have, this opportunity, and ensuring we continue life after life to achieve such rebirths.
Gombala, and as the Dundadi, Gombe Dundada, somebody who got a shingle. She's somebody how somebody Dunda Shinweg, somebody how Dambo Tursum, Tubig, Tubache, the Yam Lobjan Chegores. She's on Tursum Gomsum said, Yechimus Manzugeta, Chunium Lechabala, Tursum Gomsum, Yechimus Zigore. She's on Tur, Dambo Tur, the nigger turn, then by Janji Dunda the Hawko, then the Hawko, the Dino Gomia, Tursum Gomsum said, Yechimus Zigore. Dinashi and Yarum Chigidine, Jiki Gombaro Chizibura, Chikjuevene, Yarum Jigarsungos and Siji Cordon Chigio Mares, Siji Cordon. That only did about 16 years, Siji Cordon Chigio Mares, Siji Ludi Chilo, then bed Zibu Shujores, now only a Lobjon Chigameva, and the Yuna did Chigio Mares, Chazang Zoda, Chizibuena Mena. Lobsang Chekawa, Shingo, just not Lobsang Che, the Geshe Mashuri, just not that Lobsang Chena, Dene Chegu to Lobsang Chevana, Yamlin Karachi, Panja Canis Pongwe, Chasan Hingres, the Geshe Mores, just not the Chugu, Lobsang Che, Bemas Geshe Mu, said Yarum Chigi, Gonde Kala, Dere, Manzuki, Dazungi, Gombakala, Lobsang Chekawa, Tingi Tower, said Yarum Chigi, Shusun, that dinner, Dimas, Mimagilina, Mimaine. 생이 다고 그랬다지 대바점이 원하라 슈디기 판도고 말했어. 제가다 생이다 롭정 제고 롭정 제는 싱그레스. 제는 지금바는 되는 냠는 제다 차사 시르 되네 소속에 강하셔야 돼 디기 줘야 돼 용그레스 해야 돼. 제가 상에 좀 된데 손바 지바로 와다. 근데 donda 차상다 donda 지바 차돼요. 어두 신송을 때는 안 되네래. 다 제가 좀 쇼해야 돼. 뭐 되네 샤상 되지.
Conclusion to reiterate the importance of abandoning the afflictions. So you've heard this come up a number of times and being a particular focus at some points, but it's imperative that this is the focus of our mental engagement, what we are doing with our mind, making sure it's not under the influence of the afflictions, but rather the mind is virtuous. Because this is how one abandons the afflictions, by transforming our way of thinking, making leading our mind to be ever less afflicted, ever more virtuous. And what is the method for doing so? Well, it's to hear teachings and reflect and meditate on them. This is the meaning. And that first step of hearing or studying is imperative, because without knowledge, what is one going to later meditate on? Just to say as an aside, in this sequence of hearing, reflecting and meditating, here, meditation means single-pointed meditation. Reflection means what we normally call meditation, thinking about the meaning. Okay, that's an aside. So to be able to eventually engage in single-pointed meditation on anything, one has to know what one is meditating on. For this, one needs to have heard or studied and reflected on it, understood it deeply. So because of this, His Holiness has said many times when giving advice to monastic communities that do not put your emphasis on the superficial, in having impressive buildings and so forth. It's having superficially impressive facilities, but without impressive mental transformation inside, is completely missing the point. Impressive mental transformation, this is what matters. Having impressive environments is really unimportant. So, for those of you with capacity for studying and reflecting and meditating, that is where your energy needs to go, rather than in the superficial. So His Holiness has emphasized this many times, and I want to repeat it here, the importance of hearing and reflecting, putting one's energy there. And then we'll conclude there for this morning and continue this afternoon. Thank you.